Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Frank's World TV. I see I'm a little bit out of focus. Let's see if I can fix that. Nope. Okay. While I fix that, I'll play another intro clip. You can tell I'm really proud of my After Effects and um, and Premiere skills. All right, hello. Focus is not much better, but we will continue nonetheless. Do not attempt to adjust your screen. Let's see if we can do this. Nope. All right, it's time for a new camera. My name is Frank Lavinia. You can catch me at @FrankDigsData. Also, datadriven.tv, datadriven media .tv as well, and as well as Impact Quantum. So, I had a chance to reflect recently on user groups. So, for those of you not familiar, user groups have been around a very long time. I would say I first became aware of user groups when I was a devoted Mac user. Um, let's see what the Google says. And this way I can share my screen and not and not have to suffer. There you go. It's not as obvious, right? So I was first aware of this with Macintosh user groups, and it was basically a bunch of people that got together to learn and share their knowledge in that. And I think the first Mac user group meeting I actually attended was actually when I was in Berkeley for a brief period of time, and this was one of the more famous ones. They used to put out a magazine, a book. B-Mug was the name. And it was actually, they had 13,000 members. They definitely were probably the premier one. I did go to the New York Mac user group, but it just I never really got the timing worked out of it and things like that at the time I lived in New York. And then I kind of fell off the user group world until I discovered, all right, nope, uh, N3UG. I wonder if they're still around. All right, it's not the airplane, but there used to be a user group in New Jersey, the North Jersey .NET user group. And we had some heavy hitters and big names in attend that meeting, and it was great for me to learn about what was the new technology .NET, but also connect and network at a time when the job market was, quite frankly, unpleasant. This goes back 20 years now. Wow. Or 20 plus years. In 2003, I think I attended my first user group meeting because after 9/11, I found myself out of a job, out of an apartment, out of a lot of things. And it's particularly interesting how the user group really helped me kind of reboot my career. And I had attended a lot of the meetings there. I had traded contact information with the folks there. Big shout out to Don Demsack and Miguel Castro, who were the de facto leaders of the group. I think the facilitator of the group and the space was Tracy Ulrich, I think was her name, or Ulrich. She and some family members had owned a training company in Parsippany area, New Jersey, and they had the space and they donated it and they created a .NET user group. And that was very fundamental because at the time I was at a consulting gig, independent thing with a large accounting firm. And again, this was a very different job market. Very terrible job market. So I was ecstatic to finally get a paid gig, even though it was like 50 miles each way. Gas was cheaper, but it was working on a classic ASP. So like I was here where I was in 2003 working on 1999 era technology, um, and not that that was it was a problem in that it was very clear that the writing was on the wall and the bill rates, I don't know what it is now, but back then tended to be like the closer to the car you're cutting edge, the better the salaries would be. Um, hard to imagine it being any different, but um, but ultimately, they had a project. A bunch of us were on the maintenance gig of their older product, which was 5, 6 years old, and there was a new initiative to rewrite the product in .NET, and that was cherry picked by, let's say, two chosen consultants who had a status well above employee or contractor. Um, and they basically kept entirely to themselves. They made it very clear, like, it was a club and you're not in it. They made it seem like .NET was this impossibly hard technology. Um, And inspired by that, I just discovered the .NET user group, and I'm like, well, how hard can this stuff be, really? Right? Like you're building web pages, right? This is largely a solved problem, even by 2000, 2003, 2002, right? It's largely a solved problem, right? So I went to the user group, and I was just enthralled because they were people here that were passionate about sharing their love for technology. People were passionate; they weren't hiding it and keeping it secret, and that ignited a fire in me to learn .NET. Ultimately, got me enough skills and confidence to ace an interview at another place, which then gave me more skills and confidence to relocate actually to Richmond, Virginia, where and there was a user group there, but it had kind of fallen out of use. Big shout out to Mike, who started it. But the problem with running a user group, it is a very lonely job. It's a very thankless job, as I was soon to find out. Mike kind of helped me get started and kind of reboot the Richmond.net user group. And we did a few things. I took all the things that I saw North Jersey do really well, and we implemented that in Richmond, and we had a smashing success. We even started a secondary user group once Andy Leonard moved to town. That is actually how I met Andy in late 2005. He attended. I managed to get Miguel to come down and speak at the user group in Richmond, and he and Andy I think had just moved from Florida back to Virginia, and I was talking with Andrew Duthie, who was our developer evangelist for the region. Hey, I want to start a SQL server user group, right? And he goes, well, I don't know. You're going to need someone else to run it because you're also doing Richmond.net. And I was like, fair enough. And he's like, well, there's this guy who just moved to town. You should meet with him. So we met, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, the 360 some odd podcast episodes is actually more than that because there's a few that are kind of stuck in development for various reasons. But it's interesting to see how that works and how unreasonably effective it is in terms of people looking for a career boost or just a networking experience as well as a learning experience. Right now, I think we can all agree that COVID impacted a lot of things. And obviously, the idea of going in person to um, to a user group is kind of fallen by the wayside. I hope it comes back. Obviously, there are certain advantages of a virtual user group, or virtual events. I mean, I spoke at a couple of virtual events. The Azure Data Fest, right, happened during a blizzard. I was still able to present from my home here in Maryland. There was Tech Days Pakistan, which I spoke at a couple weeks ago now. It happened. Getting with 3 kids and 4 dogs, it's very hard to justify a trip anywhere. Um, but the ability to kind of speak at an event around the world is also very powerful. So I think that while both have their place, I think we've overemphasized the virtual in place of the physical. And I think hybrid events are the future. I think hybrid cloud's the future. I think if you get the best of this and the best of that, and you kind of create a new middle, I think that's really the most advantageous. Now, for most folks, who are not familiar with the user groups, because Microsoft used to provide an amazing amount of support and resources through user groups, whether that was the space, renting out the space, or not renting out the space, but providing the space for people to talk, providing speakers, providing sponsorship. Also, local recruiting firms had been phenomenal in terms of, here we'll buy the pizza for the group, and there it is. Um, I think that I think people are hungry for that again, that in-person experience. And, just with my little example of, Andy and I starting the podcast, if you trace it back, it all boils down to a user group meeting. And there are a lot of other good things that come out of user group meetings that in my personal experience too, like whether that's confidence or, getting used to being a speaker, right? My first public speaking gig, I suppose, was really a user group. And I had done speaking before, but it was more occasionally. But the ability to go do that on a regular basis has led to some really good outcomes for me personally. Now, I can't speak for other people, but I do know that I am not alone in the just the opportunities that presenting at a user group, attending a user group. You don't even have to present. Presenting is good, but you're just going, right, and interacting and networking and meeting other like-minded people who are looking to skill up or want to share their passion for a particular topic. And I really hope it makes a resurgence. I think obviously now in the world of Discord, hey, I'm back in focus. In the world of Discord and YouTube and Slack, and there are multiple channels, but I think in person should not be neglected. And there's kind of this debate you see, right? There's an advantage of virtual, not denying that. I've taken advantage of that. But I think there's also an advantage to doing it in person, like the olden days. So, with that in mind, what are your user group stories, right? Have you attended a user group? Have you never heard of the term user group until today? I remember my first one, as I said, was at Berkeley Mac User Group, and at the time, Apple was doing well, right? This is before the resurgence when Steve Jobs rejoined. This is a good 4 or 5 years before um, the iPod, which is a good decade before the iPad, and they were suffering. So Berkeley Mac User Group, you know, was kind of like 30, 40 people in person, and for them, I mean, that was kind of had been their new average. At their height, they had, I'm sure they're doing really good now. Although, I wonder how they were impacted by the pandemic. Anyway, user groups are an essential way of learning new skills, networking with your peers, and I highly recommend you check out ones that are local to you because chances are there's one by you, right? And if there's not one by you, it's not impossible to start one, right? I said it was a thankless job. I kind of joke about that. There are benefits to running a user group, starting a user group. I've started several. I pondering starting one for the Baltimore area. Again, leaving this area is kind of difficult. There used to be a very healthy user group ecosystem in DC. There still kind of is, but the pandemic really threw a pail of cold water on a lot of these efforts. And I do think that people are ready to meet in person again. It's not as awkward. I remember the first time I went to an event since the pandemic. I just remember sitting there, standing there in the room thinking, oh my God, there's people here, right? When I went to reInvent, and it's like 50,000 people. Normally it's like apparently 60, 70, but it was a small reInvent of 50,000 people. And it was just like, oh, this is just like the old days. And I realized, oh my God, I'm with all these people, you know? It's going to take a while for people's thoughts on crowds to go back to what they once were, if they ever do. It'll be interesting to see what the long term psychological fallout is from the pandemic. But with that, I think I'll end it. But I highly recommend you check it out. Obviously, meetup.com is one source for it, or just use your search engine of choice. In fact, why don't I see? I know Baltimore has had a rough go of things of late, but I did discover, and so for those wondering, I live kind of in the suburbs of Baltimore now. Some people argue that it's also the suburbs of DC, and I can kind of see that. But there's definitely a lot more Orioles fans here than Nationals, and more Ravens fans than anyone else. But I did discover that there is a open data hub for Baltimore in terms of their data. But let's see, maybe there's a data science user group, Baltimore. Let's see. And I always get nervous when I do a live. I do a live search on here. Meetup. Oh, it's find events. So there are some. DMV tech skilling. I've seen this one. This one looks actually pretty interesting. They do it's a public group where they do upskilling. This looks pretty interesting. But you get the idea. There's probably a user group by you, and I really encourage you to take a look at it. Oh, here we go. So it actually looks pretty cool. Actually, link visible for attendees. Intro to AI. So there is a thriving scene up here. So with that, I encourage you to reach out to your local user group community. And if you're looking for a speaker, if you're in the basically in the corridor between kind of Philly and I'll say Richmond, hit me up. I might be able to make it happen. I do spend, although not as much as last year, I do spend an inordinate amount of time up in the Pittsburgh area. I also end up finding myself in Raleigh from time to time. Let me know. And I think I'll be going to St. Louis in a little bit for a work trip. So it'd be kind of cool. They had a really great user group community there. In fact, the first data science talk I gave was at St. Louis. They had an event called Silver Linings, and it was organized. It was like a big event organized by the local user groups there, and that was cool. It was in St. Charles, I think exactly, and that was a great event. That was good to get back into the speaking things and speaking on a new topic other than Windows Phone. Uh, Speaking of which, I found this on the when I was unpacking my books the other day. This is my book that I wrote. First book I wrote. I actually have a second book published called The Qubit Before Christmas. So it's quite the strange ride it has been to write a book on Silverlight and then now a book on quantum computing of sorts. User groups are cool. It's my brother from another mother, Andy Leonard. Yes. I just saw the chat notification now. Yes, user groups are cool. I really hope they make a comeback, whether they're in person or hybrid or some combination thereof. I think they serve an important process in the ecosystem, particularly as we get into a phase of where big tech is laying off. It's a thing. Will there be more of it? I don't know. I can't predict the future, but I think it'd be good to use it in a way that I was lucky enough to use it as. Not lucky enough. I mean, I made it happen, but you know what I mean. I was fortunate to live in an area where there was a great user group. It was big enough to attract really big names. It was run by a couple big names, but it was small enough to be approachable. Like I can understand why somebody who wouldn't want to walk into a room with like hundreds of people, right? Um, North Jersey, the N3UG, which if you search it up now, I don't know if it still exists, but apparently somebody has a plane that's their tail number. Um, but it was just the right size. It was like 30, 40 people on a good night, 50 people on a great night, but a guaranteed group of like 20, dedicated core members. And it was just always great because you got to see a familiar face. If you had kind of like situation like I had at work, I wouldn't call it a toxic environment because I've had plenty of those. But it was just not a happy place, right? It was just basically you were on the grind, you were making way less than you were during the dot-com boom, and it was nice to talk to like-minded people who had a vision for the future, wanted to learn, wanted to share that knowledge. They were passionate about it. They wanted to share not just their knowledge, but also their passion. It was certainly a good time. And some people will say that over time it got a little too commercial, and that's true. It did. There were some user groups that were more about the sponsorships and kind of how that was run, but I think I miss them. Is basically what I'm saying. So with that, I will end on that note, and you get to see another one of the cool graphics that I created. And with that, you have a great day or evening, whatever the sun is doing in your part of the planet.